In a quiet suburban neighborhood where the lawns were trimmed to perfection and every mailbox stood uniform, Alex was the odd one out. A free-spirited young professional, Alex had recently inherited a plot of land from his late uncle. Unlike the manicured perfection of the cul-de-sac, Alex's yard was a blooming wildflower garden, a deliberate choice to attract bees and butterflies. His laid-back attitude clashed starkly with the neighborhood's obsession with order, a clash that was personified in his new neighbor, Karen. Karen was the self-appointed enforcer of all things proper. With her clipboard in hand and a perpetual look of disapproval, she took it upon herself to ensure the neighborhood adhered to her vision of perfection. From the moment Alex moved in, Karen seemed to have her sights set on him. First, it was the wildflowers she declared a weed infestation, then the color of his mailbox, which she deemed an eyesore. It was as though Alex's very existence offended her. Help us reach 10,000 subscribers. Your support means the world. Hit that subscribe button now. The final straw came one sunny morning when Alex was sipping coffee on his porch, enjoying the chirping birds. A police car pulled up, and an officer approached him cautiously. Confused, Alex greeted him. "What's going on, officer?" The officer hesitated before replying. "We received a call about a hazardous structure in your yard." Alex blinked, then looked at his quaint little garden shed. That's when it hit him. Karen had called 911 on him. As the officer inspected the so-called hazard, Karen appeared, smug and self-righteous. "I told you, officer, this landowner refuses to comply with neighborhood standards. His shed is a safety concern." Alex couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity, but he realized this was only the beginning. Karen wasn't just a nosy neighbor. She was on a mission to make his life miserable. Karen's campaign against Alex started small, but it didn't take long for her antics to escalate. It began with notes taped to his door, handwritten warnings about his yard being an eyesore and how it was lowering property values. At first, Alex found the notes amusing, even going so far as to pin them on his fridge like badges of honor. But Karen wasn't content with passive aggression. She needed action. The first major escalation came when Alex hosted a small barbecue for a few friends. It was a casual affair, grilled burgers, soft music, and some laughter. But just as the burgers were coming off the grill, a police car pulled into the driveway, lights flashing. Alex, perplexed, approached the officer. "We got a noise complaint," the officer explained. Karen was already waiting on the sidewalk, arms crossed and lips pursed. "They've been blasting music and disturbing the peace for hours," she exclaimed, though the barely audible background music told a different story. The officer, visibly irritated, quickly dismissed the complaint and left, but Karen's smug expression lingered. Her behavior became more ridiculous with each passing day. She filed a complaint with the city, claiming Alex's wildflower garden was a breeding ground for pests, and demanded it be removed. A city inspector was sent out, only to determine that Alex's garden was fully compliant and even environmentally beneficial. Furious at being thwarted, Karen began scrutinizing every inch of Alex's property. One morning, Alex woke up to find her standing on the sidewalk with a tape measure, documenting the height of his grass. Then came the Halloween decorations. Alex, a fan of the spooky season, had gone all out with pumpkins, skeletons, and even a small fog machine. The neighborhood kids loved it, but Karen was livid. She marched over, pointing at his decorations like they were a crime scene. "These pumpkins are not regulation size, and that fog machine is a fire hazard," she declared, snapping pictures with her phone. When Alex refused to take them down, she called 911 again. The absurdity of her actions began to attract the attention of other neighbors. Karen's antics weren't limited to Alex. She'd previously tried to impose her rules on others as well. But Alex, being the new guy, had become her primary target. The calls to the police, the city complaints, and the constant harassment started to take a toll. Alex was no longer amused. He was determined to fight back. What Karen didn't realize was that her obsessive need for control was about to backfire spectacularly. At first, Alex tried to take the high road. He ignored Karen's increasingly absurd complaints and focused on enjoying his new home. But when she called 911 for the third time in a month, this time claiming his outdoor string lights were blinding her at night, he realized he couldn't just let her antics slide anymore. Karen wasn't just annoying. She was actively trying to make his life miserable, and it was time to push back. Alex's retaliation began with small acts of humor, designed to highlight the absurdity of Karen's behavior. He set up a lawn gnome army, each holding miniature signs with phrases like, "Karen's Kingdom," "Beware of grass violations," and "No fun allowed." The neighborhood kids found it hilarious, and even a few neighbors chuckled as they walked by. Karen, however, was far from amused. She marched over to Alex's yard, fuming. "This is harassment," she shouted. Alex, leaning casually against his porch railing, replied with a smirk, "I'm just expressing my creativity. Isn't that allowed?" The gnomes were just the beginning. When Karen complained about his wildflower garden again, Alex went out of his way to make it even more elaborate. He added small signs identifying each type of flower, complete with educational facts about their environmental benefits. He even named the garden the Karen Memorial Pollinator Sanctuary and posted it on social media, where it quickly gained traction among his friends and neighbors. Karen's attempts to portray Alex as a troublemaker were starting to backfire. But Karen didn't stop there, and neither did Alex. She began circulating a petition to have Alex removed from the neighborhood, claiming he was a disruptive influence. When Alex caught wind of it, he decided to fight fire with fire. He went door to door, not to defend himself but to hear out his neighbors and get their perspective. To his surprise, many of them were just as fed up with Karen as he was. Some had been on the receiving end of her harassment for years but were too afraid to stand up to her. Alex's laid-back demeanor and sense of humor inspired them to speak out. Meanwhile, Karen ramped up her efforts, filing yet another complaint with the city, this time claiming Alex's garden fence was a safety hazard. When an inspector arrived, Alex was ready. He'd already researched the local property codes and ensured everything on his land was in perfect compliance. The inspector couldn't find a single issue, and Karen's credibility took another hit. The turning point came when Karen tried to accuse Alex of hosting illegal gatherings in his backyard. She called the police during one of Alex's casual hangouts with a few neighbors, claiming there was a raucous party disturbing the peace. But this time, Alex was prepared. He'd set up security cameras weeks ago, and when the police arrived, he showed them footage of the quiet gathering, complete with Karen herself spying on them from her window. The officers, clearly exasperated with her antics, issued her a warning for making false reports. The battle wasn't just about Alex anymore. It became a symbol of standing up to Karen's reign of petty tyranny. Neighbors who had been too scared or indifferent began to rally around Alex. Tom, the retired engineer from next door, even offered to help by digging up old HOA meeting notes that contradicted Karen's self-imposed rules. Mrs. Green, the elderly widow down the street, shared cookies and stories of Karen's ridiculous behavior over the years. Together, they began to chip away at Karen's power. But Alex knew he needed to do more. Karen's arrogance made her blind to her own vulnerabilities, and he was determined to use that to his advantage. With the support of his neighbors, Alex began to gather evidence and prepare for the showdown that would expose Karen for what she truly was, a bully hiding behind a facade of authority. As Karen's antics became the talk of the neighborhood, her reign of pettiness started to unravel. What was once quiet grumbling among the residents turned into open conversations about her behavior, and Alex found himself at the center of a growing community movement. It started with Tom, the retired engineer next door. Known for his love of gadgets, Tom had been quietly documenting Karen's actions for years with a collection of security cameras and drones. "I've got footage of her measuring people's lawns at 6 a.m., he said one afternoon, showing Alex clips of Karen sneaking onto properties with her ever-present tape measure. Tom's wry sense of humor and tech savvy made him an invaluable ally. Then there was Sophia, a single mom 2 doors down, who shared her own horror story. "She once called animal control on my kid's puppy for excessive barking," Sophia recounted, shaking her head. It was a 3-month-old Labrador. He barely made a sound. Sophia had kept her distance from Karen ever since, but seeing Alex stand up to her gave her the confidence to join the cause. The unexpected support of Mrs. Green, the elderly widow who lived across the street, was what truly solidified the neighborhood's unity. Known for her delicious cookies and calm demeanor, Mrs. Green revealed that Karen had tried to have her fined 4 excessive bird feeders, claiming they attracted too many pigeons. "She's been a thorn in everyone's side," Mrs. Green said with a mischievous glint in her eye. "I've been waiting for someone to stand up to her." With Alex leading the charge, the neighbors began to push back against Karen in subtle but impactful ways. Tom created a group chat, humorously named Karen Watch, where residents could share updates, stories, and even memes about Karen's latest antics. The chat became a source of humor and solidarity, giving the community a space to vent and strategize. As the neighbors grew closer, they began sharing their experiences openly at Alex's impromptu backyard gatherings. These casual hangouts quickly became a highlight of the week, with residents swapping stories over drinks and food. Karen's attempts to isolate Alex had inadvertently united the community against her. But not everyone was ready to pick a side. Some neighbors, wary of Karen's vindictive nature, chose to stay neutral. "She'll find a way to get back at you," warned one fence-sitter. Others, still influenced by Karen's manipulative charm, hesitated to speak out. Alex didn't blame them. He understood the power Karen wielded through fear and intimidation. One neighbor, however, shocked everyone by secretly siding with Alex. Jacob, a young man who had always seemed indifferent to neighborhood politics, approached Alex with a stack of old HOA documents he had found in his attic. "Karen's been making up rules for years," Jacob said, handing over the papers. "These bylaws prove half of what she enforces isn't even real." Armed with this new ammunition, Alex and the group began to piece together a strategy to expose Karen once and for all. Karen, oblivious to the growing resistance, continued her crusade, unaware that her authority was crumbling. Her demands and complaints became more extreme, and her public outbursts more dramatic. The turning point came when Karen tried to enforce a mandatory mailbox alignment day, demanding that everyone in the neighborhood adjust their mailboxes to match her specifications. It was the final straw for many residents, who were tired of her micromanagement. The community's growing camaraderie became a source of frustration for Karen. She could see the shift in dynamics but couldn't stop it. The once fractured neighborhood had become a united front, and Karen found herself increasingly isolated. She had underestimated the power of a group fed up with her antics, and her reign of petty tyranny was finally on the verge of collapse. Karen's undoing began with her own arrogance and relentless need to control the neighborhood. As she doubled down on her absurd enforcement campaigns, Alex and the growing coalition of neighbors quietly prepared for the ultimate confrontation. It all came to a head during one of Karen's infamous neighborhood meetings. Though unofficial and unapproved by any authority, she demanded attendance, claiming she needed to address the deteriorating standards of our community. Alex, along with Tom, Sophia, Mrs. Green, and several other neighbors, decided it was time to make their stand. Karen strutted into the meeting like a self-proclaimed monarch, armed with her clipboard and a projector to present a slideshow of violations. Her opening remarks included a scathing critique of Alex's wildflower garden, the alleged noise disturbances from his gatherings, and, most absurdly, the hazardous glare from his outdoor string lights. She concluded with a dramatic proclamation: "If we don't act now, this neighborhood will fall into chaos." Alex, leaning casually in his chair, waited for his moment. When Karen opened the floor for comments, he raised his hand and stood up. "Karen, you've made a lot of accusations about my property, but I think it's time we address something important: the truth about your so-called rules." The room grew quiet as Alex walked to the front of the room and set down a stack of papers. "These are the original HOA bylaws," he said, holding them up. "Jacob here found them buried in his attic. And guess what? Half of the rules Karen's been enforcing don't even exist." Gasps rippled through the room as Alex flipped to a highlighted page. For instance, there's no regulation about mailbox alignment. There's nothing banning wildflower gardens. And there's absolutely no decibel limit for dogs barking. Tom stood up next, playing video footage on a projector. Here's Karen trespassing on Alex's property to measure his grass. And here she is peeking into Sophia's yard to count her kids' toys. The footage, paired with Karen's exaggerated expressions and sneaky behavior, elicited laughter from the crowd. Karen, visibly flustered, tried to regain control. "This is an attack on my character. I've only ever acted in the best interest of this community," she sputtered. But Alex wasn't done. "Is that so, Karen? Because the city inspector told me you built a shed on communal property without approval. Funny how you're so strict about rules for everyone else." At that moment, Mrs. Green chimed in, holding up her phone. "And let's not forget the time Karen tried to get my bird feeders removed. You claimed they were against policy, but I checked. There's nothing in the bylaws about bird feeders." Other neighbors began speaking up, sharing their own stories of Karen's baseless complaints and petty demands. The final blow came when the local police officer, who had been called to the neighborhood multiple times because of Karen's false reports, arrived unexpectedly. "Karen, we need to have a word," he said, stepping to the front of the room. "You've been misusing emergency services with your constant 911 calls. This is a formal warning: any more false reports, and you'll be facing legal consequences." Karen, now red-faced and trembling, realized she had lost control of the narrative. Her once loyal supporters had turned against her, and the neighborhood was united in exposing her hypocrisy. She stormed out of the meeting, muttering about how ungrateful everyone was. But the damage was done. The next day, Karen's once pristine lawn was conspicuously overgrown. Her mailbox leaned at an awkward angle, and the for sale sign in her yard announced her surrender. The neighborhood had finally taken back its peace, and Karen had no choice but to leave. Alex, standing on his porch, watched as the moving truck pulled away. He couldn't resist placing one last lawn gnome on the edge of his property, a smug little figure holding a sign that read, "By Karen." The neighbors gathered for a celebratory barbecue, toasting to their newfound freedom and the camaraderie that had grown from the chaos. Karen's downfall wasn't just a victory for Alex, it was a triumph for the entire neighborhood. With Karen gone, the neighborhood felt like a completely different place. The tension that had hung in the air for so long dissipated, replaced by laughter, conversations, and a newfound sense of unity among the neighbors. For Alex, the whole ordeal had been exhausting, but it was also strangely rewarding. He had moved to the neighborhood expecting solitude, but instead, he had gained a community. The morning after Karen's departure, Alex stood on his porch, sipping coffee and admiring the peaceful scene. His wildflower garden was in full bloom, and the sound of bees buzzing around added to the tranquil atmosphere. It was the first time he could truly enjoy his home without the shadow of Karen looming over him. Mrs. Green shuffled over, carrying a fresh batch of cookies. "I made these to celebrate," she said with a sly smile. "You did what no one else could, Alex. You got rid of her." Alex laughed, taking a cookie and offering her a chair. "It wasn't just me," he replied. "This was a team effort." The neighborhood barbecue that evening was the largest gathering anyone could remember. Families brought food, kids played games, and even the more reclusive residents showed up to celebrate the Karen-free zone. Tom, ever the jokester, had set up a projector to show a montage of Karen's most ridiculous moments, complete with commentary from the group chat. The entire crowd erupted into laughter when footage of Karen measuring Alex's grass height played on the screen. Sophia raised a toast, her glass of lemonade catching the golden glow of the setting sun. "Here's to Alex, for standing up to Karen and bringing us all together." The crowd cheered, and Alex, though slightly embarrassed, smiled and raised his own glass. He had never intended to be the neighborhood hero, but somehow, he had become one. In the weeks that followed, the neighborhood thrived. Without Karen's interference, residents felt free to express themselves. Halloween decorations became more elaborate, gardens grew wilder and more colorful, and the once silent cul-de-sac buzzed with life. Even the local police officers, who had grown tired of Karen's constant calls, stopped by occasionally just to chat and enjoy the peaceful atmosphere. As for Alex, he found himself more involved in the community than he ever expected. His backyard became the go-to spot for gatherings, and his once solitary mornings were now often interrupted by friendly neighbors dropping by for a chat. He even started a small gardening club with Mrs. Green, much to Karen's hypothetical dismay. But the sweetest moment of closure came a month after Karen's departure. A letter arrived in Alex's mailbox from the city inspector. It contained a formal apology for the repeated investigations prompted by Karen's complaints, along with a handwritten note. "Thank you for standing up to her. The whole city owes you one." Alex chuckled as he pinned the note on his fridge, right next to Karen's old violation notices. It was a fitting reminder of how far the neighborhood had come. Karen's reign of terror was over, and in its place was a community stronger, happier, and more united than ever. With a satisfied sigh, Alex walked out to his porch and looked over his wildflower garden. The gnome still stood proudly at the edge of the yard, holding its sign, "By Karen." Alex raised his coffee cup in a mock toast to the empty street. "To peace and quiet," he said with a grin, finally ready to enjoy the home he had fought so hard to protect. If you loved this story and found it entertaining, don't forget to like this video to show your support and help more people enjoy the tale of Karen's epic downfall. Subscribe to our channel for more engaging, hilarious, and satisfying stories like this one. Share this video with friends, family, or anyone who's had their own Karen moment in their life. They'll surely relate. Comment below and tell us your favorite part of the story or share your own experiences with HOA drama. We'd love to hear from you. Hit the notification bell so you never miss another outrageous or heartwarming story. Thanks for being part of our community. See you in the next one.